As the legendary Rome fell and the feudal system came and went, a new era emerged, known as the revival of the arts, the Renaissance. Starting in the 14th century, the Renaissance was an era of movement in both arts and sciences. A few notable artists who were well known in this period include Michelangelo Buonarroti and the infamous Leonardo da Vinci. In addition to these advances in art, scientists expanded knowledge of the natural world. Much of the medieval art was based on religion, and in contrast to this, the Renaissance introduced the controversial arguable belief of humanism. The medieval period was characterized by a pessimistic attitude. Because of this, the artists during the Renaissance took an optimistic approach and worked to revive classical culture as well as produce beneficial ideas. During this era, Italy's geography was very influential. Venice and Genoa, located on opposite coasts, were significant trade centers of both physical products and ideas. But unfortunately, Italy was surrounded by a whole load of mountains, which made travel and communication hard. Trade routes would be sluggish and congested, and only a few were working. Italy's temperature was okay, not too hot, not too cold, which let a bunch of food to be grown, enough for an entire year. Because of that, citizens had more time for science and art. Also, the money earned from trading funded Italy's research and exposure to the arts and sciences. Science developed greatly during the Renaissance, especially technology such as the telescope and the printing press. The printing press was developed by Johann Gutenberg from Germany. Remember when the monks had to copy the books by hand? Well, when the press came out, thousands of copies of books could be made in the same time an Irish monk would take to copy one book. Oh, and guess what? Paper was used, which was cheaper than the parchment they used to copy on. Authors also used these technologies to mass produce their books, which enabled them to give their books to tons and tons of people. In the Renaissance, people started to separate science and religion. This let scientists learn lots of new stuff that went against Christianity, which was dangerous since most people were still Christian. Now, let's talk about the telescope. You know, the lenses that you learned in science. It started with a cool man called Nicholas Copernicus from Poland. He was thinking one day that maybe the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, which people thought before. See, at that time there was no telescope, so he had to use a whole bunch of cool math formulas and stuff to figure out how the Earth spun and how there was a whole bunch of other stars other than the sun. So Nicholas decided to write a book, which was disapproved by the church, obviously. A while later, the famous Galileo Galilei, an Italian physicist and astronomer, came along and built on Nicholas's knowledge. He made some awesome discoveries for the telescope and a whole bunch more about space. Now, because he was all like, the Earth moves around the sun, and the church was all like, no, the Earth is the center of the universe, he got sentenced into house arrest. Those were the main scientists in the Renaissance. Renaissance music was generally characterized by elegant flowing melodies written almost exclusively for voice. The vocal music was so pure and beautiful, the 16th century had become lovingly known as the golden age of a cappella style. Although a large portion of Renaissance music was written solely for vocalists, secular music involved the use of emerging instruments more often. With this gradual movement towards solo instruments, harmony began to develop into something more structurally sound than its previous medieval form. Instead of putting heavy emphasis on fifths and octaves, the Renaissance composers favored thirds and sixths in their chords, which proved to provide a more complete sound, which was more appealing to the ear. In addition, an expressive device known as word painting proved to be highly effective upon its Renaissance debut. This successful device allowed the music to reflect upon the meaning of the words, resulting in a significant influence of the listener's emotions. For example, the word death may have corresponded with an unnerving dissonance. The motet, a sacred work that commonly consisted of a single Latin text, was introduced during the Renaissance. It was primarily written to be used in the Mass, as well as other religious services. Motets were usually composed for at least 3 voices and were occasionally based upon a chant or a cantus firmus mass. These works were extremely religious, and subsequently, they most often praised the Virgin Mary. One such composer, noted for his mastery of the motet, was Josquin des Prez, a French native who moved to Italy. Of his hundreds of expressive and rich motets, Ave Maria Virgo Serena is the most reputable. Italian for Hail Mary, Gentle Virgin, this flawless motet is characterized by seamless combinations of both textures and voices. Art was revolutionary during the Renaissance. Many artists favored the nude style of painting or sculpting, and thus, most of the art in the Renaissance was based on nudity. A famous sculpture from the Renaissance is shown here. David, created by Michelangelo between 1501 and 1504. Notice that it's a white guy. Mainly all the paintings and sculptures of the nude people were using white guys. Racists. Alright, you just saw how the Renaissance artists portrayed men, so here's a picture to show how they portrayed women. So maybe that's what's so awesome about the art in the Renaissance to the people at that time. There's another significant thing about the art in the Renaissance. It was a building called the Sistine Chapel. No, not the 16 Scalpel, the Sistine Chapel. It was a structure with paintings covering the walls and ceilings of the building, a grand sight to see. Now, let's talk about artists. Michelangelo was a major artist in the Renaissance period. He was Italian and was apprenticed to a master when he was 13. That's right, 13, about the age of you and me. When he was 25, he was already considered the greatest sculptor in Italy. Apparently, he had a bad temper and got his nose broken once in a fight. Oh, and he died at 89. That's pretty old. Another significant person in the Renaissance was the artist Leonardo da Vinci. He's the guy who created the Mona Lisa, if you didn't already know. People say her smile makes them fascinated and perplexed. What's so cool about da Vinci? He wasn't only a painter and a sculptor, he was also an inventor, scientist, and engineer. He was the first to design a helicopter, a tank, a parachute, and a flying machine. Cool, huh? Another thing about da Vinci was that he had a restless mind. He always started new projects before finishing another. He planned on writing a textbook about human anatomy, but he never finished, although tons of notes about anatomy of humans and inventions were found in his notebook. I think he's a pretty cool guy considering he wrote all of his notes backwards so you could only read it with a mirror. And that concludes the section about art in the Renaissance. Politics during the Renaissance was relatively simple. Italy was formed by city-states, which were independent and self-sufficient. Some of the city-states included Venice, Milan, Florence, Genoa, Lucca, Pisa, and Cremona. The city-states in Italy was considerably different from the feudal system that was used in Northern Europe and had a huge role in the Italian Renaissance. These city-states prospered through trade goods and commerce and developed the basis of early capitalism. Renaissance was founded based on these circumstances where the artistic and intellectual ideology thrived and flourished. These city-states often fought with each other, struggling for power. Despotism was the form of government used at the time, and rulers often had absolute power, ignoring the laws and such. Florence was the cradle of Renaissance at the time and was ruled by the Medici family starting from 1434. Italy declined later on due to the lack of trade with Asia when the Ottomans took over the Byzantine Empire. Furthermore, King Charles VIII of France invaded Italy and pushed back the frontier several times until Rome was finally sacked by the French army led by Emperor Charles V. By then, Renaissance, the cultural rebirth, had spread throughout Europe and will change the rest of modern history. The belief of humanism emerged during the Renaissance. Humanists were more concerned with goals of being human rather than spiritual matters. They believed in using reason to discover and understand things instead of relying on things like the Bible and other religious books. Humanists thought that every person was able to choose their own destiny. One of the first humanists was Francesco Petrarch, who admired the culture of ancient Rome compared to the culture of the Middle Ages. He devoted lots of time to collecting ancient manuscripts, and through these efforts, he saved many classical works. Humanism does indeed sound similar to atheism, but there are significant differences. Atheists are people who don't believe in a god and don't believe in the concept of religion. Humanists, however, focus on the values and concerns of being a human being. They attach importance to humans rather than a god, although they do believe in a god. Some could say the development of humanism wasn't better than the previous lifestyle of Christianity, and some could say it was. So, after hearing all of that, you must be overloaded right now. So let's recap. Renaissance was the cultural rebirth that spread through Europe from the 14th century. Everyone traded ideas, and Italy's routes and temperature made that easy. Art in the Renaissance was based mostly on nudity, and the significant artists were Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, who created the Mona Lisa and David, respectively. The Sistine Chapel was a huge building full of amazing art in the Renaissance. Renaissance music was beautiful and flowing, and was known as the Golden Age of music. The music was focused on vocals, but solo instruments were featured too, with extended care to harmony. Word painting was used often, which makes the music reflect upon the words. Science developed greatly during the Renaissance, with the German Johann Gutenberg inventing the printing press, and the Polish Nicholas Copernicus and the Italian Galileo Galilei inventing the telescope. Renaissance politics were based on despotism, where one had absolute power. A famous ruling family of Florence was the Medici family, and Italy declined because of lack of trade and invasions from France. In philosophy, humanism emerged during the Renaissance. It was controversial and arguably like atheism, with some differences. Humanists focus on the goals of humans and place importance in them rather than a god. By the time Italy lost control of Rome to the French army, the Renaissance had spread so far around Europe that it will change the rest of modern history forever.